And I hope that in the course of what we have to share, that we will cause all of us to kind of maybe rethink things a little bit. That will give us some categories of and experiences and parts of the Jewish past where some of these questions have come up before, and that we would have a reason to imagine how we would like to be able to think of them for ourselves, and how you would like to be able to discuss this with people who are important to you as a result of the contemplation and the exploration that we might undertake tonight. I think that it's important to put forth a couple of ideas at the very, very outset and just ask, is there a kind of a basic pull or is it a push when it comes to Jewish identity? Is it something for us that is a matter of what others have said, this is how you are to be defined, largely because of perhaps anti-Semitism, and we feel a need to defensively respond? Is there a pull by the positive values, things that we find to be positive in the Jewish experience, and we want to hold on to, and we want to express? Is it some combination of the two? So we're going to go to the first slide tonight to be able to just make a basic observation. This is a statement from a book of Jewish mysticism. The basic text of Jewish mysticism comes from the Middle Ages. And there is a sense here of elements that I think we've all heard of, certainly, and encountered before. And what the Zohar means by this, I think, was to say that there is something utterly indivisible when we talk about God and we talk about Torah. We'll just say that in the context of sacred teaching. And the Jewish people are one and the same, that they are an indivisible whole, that you can't take one of the elements of these out of the entire picture without doing violence or harm to the totality. Now, I'm already imagining some of the issues or questions that you might want to raise about this. What if we have a decidedly non-traditional definition of God? Or what if we are agnostics or atheists? We have no belief whatsoever in God, but somehow this entity called the Jewish people is significant. Does that mean I have no place in this equation, if indeed they are all one? Is this a statement of history, that for much of history this has been the case? Or is it a statement of fundamental belief that we can't look at any one of these without conjuring up the influence of the others? You can't pick up a piece of sacred literature without imagining some divine piece of inspiration or even authorship behind it. That the Jewish people are not like just any other people. That in addition to having some sense of chosenness, they are in some measure a reflection of the divine. So is this a complete package that we are really encouraged to take on in its entirety? Or is there another set of truths that might make sense for taking a look at this whole package deal, if you will? Before we go on, I just want to mention something about terms that we're going to be using tonight. Many of us are very commonly familiar with the term identity because, we encounter it quite a bit. In modern times, two things are going on that I think are really very interesting in combination with each other. And that is that we live in a time of unprecedented individual choice and autonomy. We can basically choose to see ourselves in whatever form or fashion we would like to. We have a tremendous amount of inherent respect for that sense of individual choice. Who am I to judge if you choose to see yourself in X, Y, and Z? It's all equal. There's no way of making any statement of superiority or inferiority. At the same time, it's also a time of high focus on identity. People will very often preface a statement about something they'd like to say by the terms as a, and then you can fill in the blank. As a progressive, social justice oriented, Black or Hispanic or gay or what have you, I see things in such and such a way. As a born-again Christian who sees a lack of godliness in this world today, I believe that. As someone who is a fiscal conservative who is very appalled by endless spending with no curbs put on them, This is my stance. It's almost an announcement, as if to say, here is how we are here to express who we are by the introduction, and then what comes after it is almost a kind of extra tag on to what is already said, because we've already said a lot by just the introduction in those ways. So in older times, there was really no similar sense of identity. It's been said that the way in which one knew who was somebody was a traditional Jew is that they never used the term. They didn't have to. It was basically an assumption that if one lived in such and such a way, that is how they would be understood. Nobody used the term Orthodox to describe a traditionally observant Jew until a couple hundred years ago. The term didn't exist. And because of things of this nature, it's a very interesting kind of thing, because we all know as well that in some parts of our world, the world is divided into two fundamental categories. You are either oppressed or you are part of the oppressing class. And that is how that becomes part of the root, I think, of some of the angst and the anxiety that so much of the Jewish world has experienced as a result of this. One of the things that shocked a good deal of the Jewish world, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, is that in the first week after October 7th, this is before Israel undertook any military activity of any significance in Gaza at all. There were 150 protests in favor of Hamas throughout the country. That was before there was any military activity. And the famous quote about one individual is that they found the experience of seeing the Hamas attack as being exhilarating, as if this is, a remarkable kind of thing. It took the United Nations several months, 4 or 5 months, to condemn the attack on women, the rapes and the mutilations that took place, in light of the kinds of things that had happened earlier on in many other kinds of scenarios and situations, where there would be a condemnation immediately of what took place in Nigeria by Bring the Girls Back, all of these kinds of things that really underscored the reality of the Jewish world feeling very, very much under siege. And this is before we're talking about what took place at campuses and the experience of Jews coming together and saying, for the first time in my life, I now feel that sense of the push of negativity that my grandparents always used to talk about. So I think we're in a place where we're starting to see that something significant has, in terms of our moment in time, has become something that is really pushing a kind of reevaluation of things. The other kind of thing that I just want to mention is that Jews have been able for a long time, this is really more of a pre-October 7th observation, to live what is commonly called a hyphenated life. We had not felt an awful lot of tension necessarily, for the most part, when someone would ask, who are you? And one would say, I'm a Jew and an American, or I'm a Jewish American, or I'm an American Jew. And a lot of times there'd be a dash, a hyphen in between them. And there might be some tensions or some difficulty with that, but by and large, it was a reasonable kind of thing. Or there would be some kind of a sense of, I believe in the universal mission of all Jews, or all people being treated with dignity. I believe in bridge building, but then there are times when we have to circle the wagons a little bit and identify for our own people and what they need. Those kinds of hyphens, if you will, those dualities, that sense of I can be religious and appreciate the secular at the same time, those kinds of things were a reasonably comfortable thing for us to have. But these days, one senses a little bit less comfort with them. Let's see if we can trace this back a little bit and take a look at it with a little bit of a glance backwards, but also very much, please, along the lines, there are going to be questions directed to you. How do you see things? How do you identify? What, if it makes sense to say so for you, really triggers a response of, yeah, that's me, as we go through this, or maybe this could be me, but I'm not sure. So let's go on to the next slide. I'm guessing some of us have seen this before. And in a way, I guess this reflects what was said before, that there are elements that are all kind of put together, that God, Torah, and the people are a single entity. This one states it a little bit differently. From Pirkei Avot, that little text that is really an introduction to the Mishnah, the first real text of Jewish law by our sages, that the world, think of it as a kind of tripod or a chair with three prongs, however it is most comfortable for you. The world stands on three things. You have to have all three, right? So in a sense, it is saying you have to have all of them: on Torah, on divine worship, and on acts of loving kindness. Notice it doesn't say on God. It said that the very deed of divine worship, earlier on, it would have been the experience of sacrifices, and now it's the experience of prayer, and on Torah itself, divine worship, and on acts of loving kindness. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that one has to believe in a particular background to the Torah. It doesn't say that divine worship has to be in expressively a certain kind of way. It doesn't say that acts of loving kindness are only for Jews, right? And it doesn't use the word tzedakah, which is monetary for the most part. You put money in the pushka, you write a check, you do all of these things. Act of loving kindness is much more of a tangible, tactile kind of thing. You're going out and trying to do something that makes life a little bit different, a little bit better for other people in the world. So I see in this, and maybe you might or not, so tell me if you agree or disagree, that the minute you start saying that there are three separate elements, we're almost invited to say, you know what? I naturally seem to find myself drawn to one or more of these things. And what I would say is probably, if I were just to draw a kind of generalization here, that middle one, divine worship, prayer, is a tough thing for a lot of people. It's a tough thing for a lot of people, partially because language can be a barrier, partially because people aren't quite sure what they think about God, and to say words that don't necessarily feel as if they are personal and expressive of one's authentic sense of self, that these are elements of things that we don't want to be able to express that really aren't authentic for us. I was a little bit distracted by Bobby's wonderful question, so I'm going to break my rule and just answer it quickly about avodah. Avodah means work. It does mean work. But in the original context, it's divine worship. And arguably, the work avodah, which is like plowing your field as well, that same word applies. Divine worship for a lot of people is a lot of work, because to be able to penetrate it takes some elements of energy and of investment of self. I want to circle back to the first one as well. What I think is extremely wonderful about the ancient sages saying that the world stands on Torah is that it is, in this case, agnostic about the source. It's a celebration of sacred text. And as such, what I think is really very, very powerful is that if one were to study the role of teaching Torah, you will find that the idea of having universal Jewish literacy was a value early on. Mordechai Kaplan, who was not a total religious traditionalist by any stretch, said that what made the Jewish world tick was the fact that there was a concerted effort to always, always teach children the Jewish story. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, the Jewish experience is a Jewish story. And this emphasis on telling that story, yes, combined with food, which makes it a table-based, celebratory kind of thing, think the Seder, think the Shabbat table, think other times of coming together, that it is this remarkable expression of Jewish values being encased in a way that does not demand necessarily religious faith. It just demands an openness to a set of texts. I just want to mention one of the remarkable victories of Jewish life. It is a cultural victory. Uh, Amos Oz and Fania Oz Salzberger are two very wonderful writers. Amos Oz is a remarkably gifted novelist. He wrote My Michael, Telling Our Story, Here and There in the Land of Israel, and a bunch of other wonderful texts. He and Fania Oz Salzberger are proud atheists. Proud atheists. They tend to tack politically left. And they have written at length about the magnificence of the Jewish experience when it comes to what we would call Torah. And we'll come back to that a little bit later, but one thing I just want to mention to you, which is something I did not know. In the beginning of the 20th century, you could probably count the number of people who were literate speakers of Hebrew on just a few hands. At the end of the 20th century, and into the 21st, there are 10 million speakers of Hebrew, 7 million native to Israel, maybe even 8 million now, and another 2 to 3 million who are not native to the language, but are capable of conversing and reading and penetrating it to a significant degree. That's 10 million, maybe even 11 million. So to give you a bit of context, that is more people who speak Danish, more people who speak Lithuanian. It is more people, and this is a little bit more delicious than many situations, one might say, more people who speak the Austrian dialect of German. That is a huge victory. And it is a celebration, not because of religious faith, it is a celebration of Jewish teaching, of telling the Jewish story, of being capable of doing it in ways that are both, for many people, of course, religious, but even in ways that are not. So it is a clear and very fundamental kind of thing. And by the way, it does reflect back on people who just a personal little story that Nancy and I were in this past summer in Niagara Falls. So we were on the American side of the falls, and Israelis love to travel. And so we're up by the falls, and there we hear in Hebrew, the tour guide saying in Hebrew, Od ma'at v'namshich lagvul. In a little bit, we're going to go to the border, the boundary, the Canadian border, because everyone knows the Canadian side of the falls is much better. But just that moment of hearing the language, we smiled at each other. And it was this moment of the language and the culture being this piece of peoplehood that very, very powerfully resonated. So for those who say, I don't know if I can deal with Torah because it's not my religious kind of leaning, what if it were to be learned as a pillar on the basis of its cultural, its historical impact, and the gifts we have given to the rest of the world as a result? Okay, Essen Bench and Zaya Mensch. I love that. Okay, that's Yiddish is so evocative. It's a wonderful thing, Gilda. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm breaking all of my rules. Go ahead to the next slide. So I didn't want to leave it with just 3, to be sure. I wanted to give you a list. This is not in any way a total and complete list, but this is a kind of not so random, but certainly a collection of things that I have encountered people saying in answer to the question, who is a Jew? And so are we a people in some measure? Well, what are the qualities of a people? Does a people require a land? Well, we haven't always had a land. We've had 2,000 years of exile from that land. Is it a language? We've had a variety of languages. Is it some sense of shared history? Maybe so. Is it a race? In a time when race was very clearly delimited to the experience of physical characteristics, it really didn't make much sense. Now perhaps it makes more sense, but in the 19th century, even before, you routinely would see people referring to the Jews as a race. So we can't ignore it. We shouldn't erase it. Is it an unbroken textual tradition? Sorry about the type of it. In the sense of there is something that goes on from a very, very long past that has not really been broken because it has been constantly renewed in a variety of ways. Now, I said a religion, and I want you to note that I make a distinction between 4 and 5, not because there's no divine sense to a religion, but a religion could be defined by people in a very general kind of way. It is a system of beliefs and behaviors that people hold to be sacred and enact. Okay, that's an objective way of defining it. But number 5 says it's not just that there is such a thing, it's from God. I eat only matzah or I avoid any kind of leaven, eat only matzah on the first couple of days of Passover because God told me to do so or God wants me to do so. I am very careful about giving 10% of my income, adjusted gross to be specific when it comes to Jewish law, for tzedakah, because that is not just what I generously of my own heart want to do, because God wants me. Okay? And one could delineate some subtleties in that, but that is certainly a belief that many people have. A Jewish state. I think it goes without saying that many people, certainly a whole swath of Israelis and secular Jews, in addition to religious Jews and nationally oriented Jews, would say that it is someone who lives in, supports, and cares deeply about the Jewish state and does everything within their power to support it, to be a defender of it, and arguably, as a statement of concern for the state, to be a loving critic of it. Because certainly many people say the well-being of the future of Israel stands clearly in the balance unless we do A, B, and C, and people will say, avoid a Palestinian state at all costs, or people say, make some arrangement with the Palestinians because we don't want to be like Sparta. So there certainly are elements of that. A guardian of memory. With that, I just want to mention a contrast. We all know the power of memory as a statement in Jewish life. It's going to be a part of what we're doing at Bible and Breakfast tomorrow morning. Sorry for the unpaid political announcement for the coming attractions, but that's going to be part of what we do for reasons that we'll get into in just a moment. But as Jonathan Sacks famously says, we as Jews shy away from the term history, because if you divide the word history, it's too distancing. History is, taken into 2 words, his story, but not necessarily mine. Memory immediately makes it mine. It makes it ours. We can say that, we know for a fact that we are who we are because of our East European roots. We know that the experience of Jews, negative and positively, has impacted us to this day. The famous story is told of Napoleon walking down a street, I believe in Paris, seeing Jews on Tisha B'Av, the sad day of remembering the destroyed temples, who were bewailing the fact that they were crying. They were chanting a biblical book, reciting prayers and crying. Napoleon asked an assistant, "What are these people? What are they doing?" He says that the Jews who are crying about their destroyed city of Jerusalem and their destroyed temple. And Napoleon asked the question, "Well, how long ago did that take place?" And they said, 1,700 years ago, Your Majesty. And Napoleon famously said, according to this story, a people that remembers something from 1,700 years ago is destined to remain forever. Okay? That's the power of that. A defender against anti-Semitism. Lord knows, we have had so many reasons why, especially in the last several years, to be very fiercely more vigilant than ever before about the rising tide of anti-Semitism. It's spelled against the normal grammatical rules for this because it doesn't seem appropriate to put the capital S there to elevate it to a higher status than it should have. That's why we spell it that way. It's a new change of how it's written. Nancy and I happened to be in Pittsburgh for the funeral of a family friend. And I got, really very powerful feelings when we happened to pass the Tree of Life Synagogue where the terrible shooting took place in 2018. It was very real to see that. And the concern that we had maybe in prior years was that, too much emphasis was placed on Jewish defense. Everybody doesn't hate us. We're admired. Don't push that button all that much. It shouldn't be a way that we define ourselves. Too many positive things are here, but it seems to be the case that we would be terribly oblivious and terribly blind if we were not to watch and to defend against what has taken place But for some people, this has been throughout their lives a sense of we have to defend ourselves. And that is a defining, perhaps for some people, the defining characteristic. I am Jewish because I have to defend my people against anti-Semitism. Number 9, a promoter of social justice in the world at large, not with respect necessarily to the Jewish world. Racial justice, environmental justice, economics, the rubric of tikkun olam. We'll not go into its history, but repair of the world, tikkun olam, as a way of saying that we are chiefly here to make a difference in the world at large. And when there is suffering any place, a Jew also suffers and is obligated to make a difference in that regard. It is true with the elements of feminism, racial justice, all of the kinds of things that have become significant social movements, and is very much the core identity for a significant number of people who say my Jewish expression is primarily that. I'm mentioning number 10, a social critic. Some people would say that one of the only advantages, but certainly an advantage, of being on the outs, of not being able to have the freedom to defend oneself, the freedom to define oneself, to express oneself Jewishly, is the reality that on the margins of society, you were able to see things from a more objective but clear distance than if you actually were in the middle. You could see the rot that would be at the core of a society. You could see the rising tides of autocracy when they took place. You would be able then to call them out, at least from that vantage point, if you were not able to be able, in some respect, doing anything else other than being able to say, here we are, you better pay attention. And in time, people would take notice. Number 11 goes with number 9, I suspect, in many ways, believer and promoter of human progress. Some people believe that progress is almost an inevitability if it is nurtured and pushed along. And many people see Jews as being clear defendants of that process. Do you believe that progress is an inevitability? Do you believe that it is your task to move it along? If so, that too may very well be a Jewish expression and a very primary one. The ultimate free thinker. I mention this only because people, think that, especially in secular terms, that one of the remarkable things about the Jewish experience, because of all of the range of different kinds of opinions that Jews have, that we are bidden to use reason, we are bidden to use our God-given intellects and preferences to be able to say, I think differently. Jews on the margins of society were able to say, you know what, I am not going to follow the pathway of the majority. I'm on the other side like Abraham. I see things differently. And people will often talk about that. I don't know how these might resonate with. Maybe jot down one or more that has some interesting resemblance to how you see things, and see if it's the case that they're somewhat expressive. And if they're not, what might be? Okay, next slide. So there are people who find that they are drawn to a single kind of essence. And I like this little story. It happened that I'm just going to paraphrase it, I'm guessing some of you have seen it, came before Shammai and said to him, make me a convert to Judaism on condition that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. Everybody know what an elevator pitch is? I have a lot of chutzpah talking about this because I am not in the business world. But an elevator pitch, as I understand it, is that you're riding up in the elevator with the CEO of you're with Elon Musk or somebody that you feel more comfortable with, who knows, and you have something that you want to say. Here is my great brand new idea. Here's my startup and everything else. You're on the first floor and you have until the 15th floor in order to get your idea across. What do you say? Here's why you should invest in me. And in a way, for some people, this is that whole idea as well, that if you really, really, really had to boil Judaism down to something, what would it be? I often ask bar and bat mitzvah kids, if I said to you, look, there's a student who's coming It's not the Empire State. It truly isn't here. If somebody were to come and be a student in King Philip Middle School coming from Bulgaria or some country where they never met many Jews, and they came to see all these kids becoming bar and bat mitzvah, and they asked you, what is that all about? What does it mean to be a bar bat mitzvah? What would you say? And the kids almost always say, well, it means to become a Jewish adult. And then, terrific, thank you very much. That opens the door. And what does it mean to be a Jewish adult? And this is similar. Is there an essence? Is there something that really, really speaks to you that is kind of a hook or an anchor that you find yourself holding on to? So for Shammai, who had a secondary job, he was a tanner, and he said, to teach me a convert standing on one foot, and therefore the convert annoys him, so he was repulsed by the builder's cubit that was in his hand. He basically says, get out of here. And then he goes before Hillel, the ever-patient and magnanimous Hillel, and said to him, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is the commentary. Go and learn it. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. So if there's an anchor for Hillel here, it is a formulation, perhaps in negative terms, but we'll deal with that another time. It's sort of a version of love your neighbor as yourself, but more perhaps concrete. Don't do to your neighbor what you wouldn't do to yourself. And everything else is commentary. Now, if I was Maimonides in the Middle Ages, knowing Maimonides' emphases, I bet he would say, be careful of idolatry because the temptation is everywhere to elevate something before God. It could be money, it could be art, it could be all sorts of sports, it could be all sorts of interesting, wonderful things. Don't commit idolatry. And for other people, it could be, as Emil Fackenheim once said, the 614th commandment out of 613, an extra one, never give Hitler a posthumous victory. Live a Jewish life and such, never to give him a posthumous victory. I think a lot of people may find that they have something that they go back to. And if you have such an anchor, if you have such a kind of starting point, how do you understand it? How is it helpful for you? And what would you do to enhance your relationship to it? Would you want to trade it in for a new one? Would you want to enhance it, expand it, or would you want to dig deeper into the one that is your standing on one foot definition? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, you are not required to even read this. Look at the page. We're going to highlight for just 1 second of 3 Hebrew lines. Perfect timing. Thank you, Lydia. You see the blue there? 3 Hebrew lines of text. And I chose this reasonably arbitrarily, beginning of chapter 5 of the book of Genesis. I just want you to look at the reality that we have here a small amount of a biblical text. This is from the Torah, chapter 5 of Genesis. Look what's around it. And around there is a sea of commentary. Now, how many of you, by a show of hands, I can see a few of you, think that every single commentary on this page agrees with every other one? Nobody raises their hands, okay? They're entirely at odds with each other, or they bring different perspectives. So the last thing I think any of us would want to say when Hillel says, the rest is commentary, that's not the end of the story. Commentary is not a negative. Go and study it is, okay, and now what? And now what? And now there's much, much more. And now when you begin to engage with the 1,000+ years that is on this page, and then many things after it, of course, you begin to see that the Jewish journey, the cultural Jewish journey, even if it's a secular one, is a conversation between the ages. And what would be the commentary you might write to any particular piece of Torah? For some of us, the headlines of today are screaming relevance based on what we've experienced 2,000 years ago. And there is something for them to say to each other, the ancient text and today. Let's go on a bit more. So a couple of words about this. This hit me during Hanukkah. And that is how we pronounce this word, Judaism. And I think it's relevant to the other questions we've raised about identity. It's about, anchors that we find for ourselves. So phonetically, we have the word Judaism. Now, I've been saying kind of a little bit off the cuff, I suppose, that I know a lot of Judies. I'm sure you do too. They're all really, really wonderful people. But to the best of my knowledge, none of them have launched a religion. And yet that is the way in which it is commonly pronounced by convention. Judaism is a UK kind of pronunciation of the term. But Judaism technically might be closer to what we are really talking about. Who is Judah? You would be right if you said the fourth son of Jacob in the Bible. Judah is the individual whose very name means gratitude. Judah, Yehudah. It means gratitude. Judah in the Torah is somebody who is capable of doing some pretty crummy things and being noble and being able to say, I was wrong. Judah is capable of having repentance. Judah becomes ultimately the key identifying feature for a good part of the land of Israel. When we talk about Judah Maccabee, we all have that sense of the hero of the Hanukkah story, but the place in which Judah Maccabee lives is a place called Judea by that time. So our story is really about an individual who had certain characteristics, who had certain qualities of self, gratitude being the part of it, from which we get the word Jews. The word Judaism becomes, as pronounced and so forth, is in some respects really a more modern term. You probably don't see it much before the 19th century out of German universities. Before that, it was Am Yisrael, the Jewish experience, the Yiddishkeit, you may know the term. It was a warmer kind of thing than this more kind of technical situation. Lydia, do not let me do updates now. Thank you. That'll mess up my the whole presentation. Okay, we're good. So we have the experience of being able to say, where do we draw our inspiration from? And what does it mean to draw inspiration from the word whose very essence means capacity to change, capacity to be grateful, capacity to be a leader on the basis of the growth and reality of what leadership is. So maybe we'll try a little bit of a mini campaign and start saying Judaism, just so we remind ourselves of where it comes from. How does that resonate for you to know what that background really is all about? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, two paths at a time of crisis. This again goes to the issue of the pull and the push. We did this a couple of years ago. We talked about the taste of the greats. Moses Mendelssohn was someone who said to the world of Central Europe, Germany in particular, look, no more we Jews demand emancipation. And he pushed for emancipation. No more ghettos, no more being sidelined. We are ready to be full citizens of the land of our ancestors, meaning Germany. And he tries to draw Jews. He's a traditional Jew. He tries to bring people into it, his fellow Jews. He writes a commentary and a translation of the Bible into German using Hebrew letters. So people think at first it's Yiddish, but he's really teaching them German. And he thinks that there is a way of really walking on the tightrope of maintaining traditional Jewish life and at the same time being a good citizen of the native country. It didn't always work out. Some of his own children and grandchildren became assimilated and they lost a sense of Jewish identification. And so in many respects, that pathway was troubled, to say the least. Theodor Herzl was much more pessimistic about Jewish life. And he saw the Dreyfus affair in France. He saw what was going on throughout Europe. He saw what was going on in Eastern Europe, where the pogroms would be taking place. He said, the only way to survive the Jewish future, to create a Jewish future, and to deal with anti-Semitism is a Jewish state. We will never make it by trying to be loved by everyone else. It just won't work. And this has been the bifurcation, the division ever since. And I think that in many respects, many, many people I know have sought to live the very best of Mendelssohn. Let's be citizens, good, solid citizens of our native country, and Jews who are proud and expressive of Jewish identity, and very, very understanding, supportive, and expressive of this Jewish state that Herzl saw as being capable of really not only solving a problem for Jews, but actually solving a problem for European anti-Semitism, getting rid of it. So perhaps you feel a little bit more attuned to one or the other, but I think it's fair to say both of them have impacted how we see ourselves. Okay, we're going to 10:30 tonight, right? Let's go on. I'm kidding. So I just wanted to draw this in here because I was just obviously thinking recently about Jimmy Carter and his post-presidency. You know, this is such a vibrant kind of an expression. And we're coming up on Martin Luther King Day, and I'm thinking about Abraham Joshua Heschel, who could write in his study till he was, up all night about piety and God and the great teachings of the past. And then he got out to Selma and felt that his feet were praying because he marched with Martin Luther. So for people who don't necessarily find that they can open up a prayer book, and I get that very, very clearly for some people, and though we try certainly to help with that, isn't this a form of prayer as well? Do people not see this? And now I'm just talking about saying a prayer at the beginning of the building session when you're putting the house up. I'm talking about the very act of the building. In how many ways is this an expression of Jewish identity? Because it's so much with us. So this is a vibrant image of it, but we have other images I want us to see. Next slide, please. This is an expression, certainly, and the timing, I think, is very right because I'm hoping, I think we all are, that this very clearly concretized, almost concretized ceasefire with Hamas and the release of hostages is actually finally beginning to happen. But this is a lived reality of a Jewish value of Pidyon Shvuyim, of bringing our people home. And for people who had no sense or little sense that there is an imperative to Jewish life, this somehow really tipped them over the edge in ways that I think many other things might never have done. The sense of Jews being carried out simply by being Jews or Israelis, sometimes as Americans or Thais for that matter, and carried out as kidnapped individuals, as hostages, suffering, in some cases dying. Here is Milut Chasadim writ large, in the sense of serving the Jewish community. Think about the emotions that this triggered in you, in other people. That was a very powerful kind of expression that has, in some ways, gone beyond what we can express in words. The power of our people saying that this is indeed a Jewish expression, but in fact, we feel something uniquely about it. Would we honestly feel this way if it was the same exact thing for hostages taken by the Chinese government or by the Sudanese? It's a difficult question to even pose, but I think it's one that raises something that's very instinctual in all of us. Next slide, please. I have to move the pace a bit. And this is obviously another expression. This is, of course, the Nova Festival, the memorial to the Nova Festival, the music festival that was decimated, almost 400 killed there by Hamas in that one setting, which was a place of celebration, became a place of death, of carnage, of kidnapping. Again, another expression. All of these young people there to celebrate the beauty of being together, to celebrate youth and energy. Whose lives were tragically, horribly, brutally cut short. Go ahead, please. I raise this for an interesting point. I don't know of anyone who is not moved, saddened, horribly upset by the experience of the fires. If this hadn't happened, I probably would have put a slide of what took place in New Orleans on New Year's Day. But what I raise about this is the Pasadena Jewish Center, and the experience of saying it's a horrible, horrible thing, and there's a Jewish angle for this. I know people who would say, why would you even have to care about raising a Jewish angle? But we do in many respects. And if you're one that says, I want to know that there is something that I can concretely, in addition to supporting everybody who's suffering, is there a Jewish piece to this? There were a couple of Israelis who were injured in New Orleans. That came out in the news right away. And there are people here who are saying the temple and center are very significantly impacted here. We should support that as well. Inspired by one of our folks and teachers, in our community in Bethel, if we have a fire alarm, and we know it's planned in terms of just an ordinary kind of drill, we can't do this with security drills, but if we have it for a fire drill, and we know that, we have people, I've done it myself and others do, we save at least one Sefer Torah. We bring it out. Because all things being equal in terms of danger and life and so forth, nobody I know, the most stone cold person towards religion, would see anything less than a huge tragedy if the Sefer Torah were to burn. So we take it out. We take it out. What is so primal about that for so many people? What is it about that that strikes all of us as being, I would venture to say, important? Go ahead, please, Lydia. Few books have touched upon this theme of I am Jewish identity more than this wonderful collection of texts with sheer variety of ages and perspectives and ideas than Daniel Pearl, who was viciously murdered in 2002 by Al-Qaeda terrorists, who stated very famously, I'm a Jew, my parents were Jewish, and he invited the question, his parents invited the question, and what makes you exactly this? It's very worthwhile reading, and I just wanted to take one quote from it, which is the next slide. So this is one of the teachers, and there's a reason why I quoted this of all the hundreds that are included in this. Naim Dangour, the leader of Iraqi Jewry. Okay, so what does he say? When I was a young boy, a teacher at school, why are you a Jew? And practically said, because I was born one. Can't escape that, I suppose. And then there's something that rings truer than one might think. It's a birthright, a glorious gift from one's forefathers, ancestors, of faith, culture, and heritage. For me, it's my strong Babylonian heritage, the heritage that Daniel Pearl also shared, his mother having been born in Baghdad, that makes me so proud to be a Jew. Now, for those of us who've had exposure to Jewish texts, I ask two questions. If you had to locate on a map today where Avraham Avinu, the first Hebrew, came from, what modern country would that be? And if you had to locate on a map where the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, arguably the single most significant creation of the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years, with 7.5 million words, God bless it, it's huge. Where did that take place in the modern map? Both of them are in Iraq. There is a line. And for me, and I can only say this personally, it's an invisible line that has a cord of mystical connection to it. And it doesn't escape, it's there. Well, we should know that what happens in ancient times has a way of revisiting itself in our own times. Onward, if we could please. We're finishing up soon. I'm just going to touch on this differently, briefly rather. So we have here, perhaps in some respects, the most significant quote from the book of Esther. The book of Esther is dismissed as kind of a fairy tale. It's with hamantaschen and fun and carnivals and everything else. But Mordechai says at a very key moment in the story, when the Jewish fate is in the hands of not just a vicious minister by the name of Haman, but a drunken, foolish king, and Esther understandably is hesitating. If you keep silent in this moment, maybe there will be relief from another quarter. But the last line, perhaps you have attained royal position for such a time as this. Again, I think many of us feel that the last few years is not business as usual for the Jewish people. It was challenging to have COVID and the quarantines, to be sure. That was its own challenge. But the last several years, and especially since October 7th, something is palpably different about how we see ourselves in many respects for many people. And the question I'd like to pose is, after we explore some of this for ourselves a little bit, is there something that the moment is calling upon us to do about it? about the Jewish expressions we seek and we see within us as being significant and important. Okay, a little bit forward video. Okay, and this will be basically our semi-closing slide. I chose this because there are many different ways to kind of summarize Jewish approaches or the story, the Jewish story we seek to tell. We happen to be on the calendar smack dab in the middle day of the week. It's the middle of the week between finishing the book of Genesis and synagogue readings. We did that last Shabbat. And this Shabbat, we're starting with Exodus. Okay, then it's kind of a no man's land to an extent. Because yes, it's a story of a clan becoming a big nation, but it's more than that. So a very creative teacher by the name of Rabbi Daniel Hartman says this: there seem to be two fundamental Jewish expressions in the modern era. One is the Genesis expression. Genesis Jews have an identity of being, he says. There is a heritage, there's a tradition passed on. God chooses Abraham. Abraham passes it on to the other patriarchs and matriarchs. And this is kind of an identity that's passed on. It's assumed. Nobody does anything to get the identity. It's just passed on to the rest of the clan, and it becomes a kind of interwoven sense of self for those who are there. However, Exodus Jews, it's an identity of consent. Will I participate and identify with the practices, with the ideas, the commandments, the values that are being presented? Will I identify with the lessons of the Exodus about freedom? Will I identify with the call of God on Sinai? And there is a sense there of choice that ultimately can be a part of that equation. Now, there are some people who, Rabbi Hartman argues, tend to identify more with one side than the other, and maybe you do too. But ultimately, the Jewish world needs both. We need people who see that there is a heritage, there's something, there's a history, there's a cultural set of treasures that have been passed on to us, and that we owe that past something. And there is this need for active engagement, for wrestling, for commenting, writing our own commentaries, studying other people's ideas in the past, and making something of this our very own. That a spark from both sides can yield a very magnificent flame. How do you see yourself within this kind of understanding? Does one seem more natural than the other to you? And has anything in the most recent events in the Jewish world made a difference in how you have begun to approach your Jewish identity? Okay, last one, right? I hope I have it right. Let's circle back to sort of where we began. Is there a single essence to Judaism? And I reframed this in a way of saying, is there a starting point? Do you find yourselves with the starting point that says, you know what? This is something that I find really is the anchoring idea that truly motivates me, and it's worth exploring some more. And it's clear enough that, well, I can explain it to myself, I can explain it to my family, to others, friends, and the rest might be commentary, but it might be worthwhile to discover just that. Okay, so I have 3 minutes to cover all the questions you might possibly have. I'm really sorry. I hope to end sooner. Can we tackle a little bit of this? I know some people have an 8 o'clock meeting, so I apologize for that. Do we have some things in the chat that we can take a look at here?
So our friend Michael Schenker had a question posed at the very beginning. If God is one, how are or what are the implications of God, Torah, and the Jewish people are one?
Okay, so that's actually a statement that many have asked within the standpoint of, is this idolatry in some level to say that Torah and Jewish peoplehood are as holy, if you will, as God? And what then could that possibly mean if there is an equality of expression of religious value for all three? So, oh, everybody's here. That's nice to see you all. So that expression, I think, is really at some level an experience of a fair statement of Jewish values throughout the ages. But when it comes back to the source of this being kind of a mystical statement, it is not, I think, a sense of trying to establish one over the other or to in any way denigrate the divine unity, the oneness of God, but rather to say that there are some strands that are almost inseparable. How do we come to know God? For example, arguably it is through what's understood as divine texts and the sense of the people that we are a part of and what it is here to do. So I hope that begins at least to touch upon that possible way of understanding it, because it's understandably not so simple. I touched on what Bobby mentioned before about Torah being work, and arguably one of the challenges of any of these expressions of Judaism is that frankly they take work. They take work to kind of plumb the depths to be able to say that there is depth here, there is value here, there are different perspectives here that are worth investigating. And the degree to which one is capable, willing, and prepared to dig beneath a surface, I think there is the possibility of great richness there. And again, to clarify for yourself and to perhaps expand upon it for your own understanding. And Yildiz reminds us about the unique taste that Yiddish has. But it really is an expression that it's not isolated reading in a classroom that is the core and sole emphasis of Jewish study. It's the sharing of it. It's the memories of it. It's in ancient times smearing the first page of Torah study with honey, so it will be sweet for children. It's the expression of moving from text to life with nothing in between, so that there would be a kind of very clear expression that this is a reality that has to be expressed. And it is not the Empire State Building, of course, for the elevator pitch. Was there more?
I just wanted to reshare this one slide, because I know that you threw out the idea of folks thinking of which one of these they really align themselves with, or they feel speaks to them. And then we went on to the next slide. And I didn't know, I know that we're gonna log off soon because it's 8:01, but in case people wanted another look at it, we would love to hear from you. You can share which ones kind of resonate with you, or you can think on it and share it with us via email. I'll send out the recording of this class tomorrow. Okay, so if you want to take a look at it or share it with anyone, you're welcome to.
Thank you. And this is an invitation to a conversation. So beyond the scope of the class itself, I hope we'll find ways, and I invite you to come together with others, certainly, and certainly to call us here. We're more than delighted to have an opportunity here at Bethel to discuss these things with you, because it's a core expression of what a synagogue community is supposed to be.
All right. And think on if you would like to join us for this class in person.
Yes.
Right now we're on Zoom, and we would maintain the conversation no matter what. But if you would be interested in having this class in person, be sure to let us know. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Warm rest of your Wednesday night.
Thank you.